Here with me is Tobias Bernard from GNOME with the speech, Building the Public Interest Desktop. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tobias, and today I'm going to talk about the project that we've been doing from the GNOME side with the Sovereign Tech Fund. I'm going to introduce all of those things in a little bit, but before we start, just a few words about myself. So I'm actually originally from this region. I've studied at the University of Bolzano. Hi to any current or former students. Happy to be back here. And I've been involved with GNOME for the better part of a decade, doing all kinds of things, mostly on and around the design team. And as part of that, it's a self-organized sort of context where, if you actually want stuff to happen as a designer, you need to sort of organize it yourself often. And so I think you slip naturally in a bit of an organizer role sometimes. And that includes knowing the right people to talk to make things happen, doing events, things like that. And then as part of that, I also sometimes organize grants and things like that. And as part of this, I've coordinated this SDF project. So I'm assuming most of you are familiar with GNOME, but just in case you aren't, just a handful of words on it. So GNOME is a fully free operating system stack, including everything from the really low-level parts that you need to, for example, draw windows on the screen, all the way to the actual apps that you're using every day. The developer tools needed to do all of this, a lot of parts, literally hundreds of modules, working together to basically create a whole operating system stack that can compete with any of the proprietary ones. If you haven't tried it recently, you should, because it's gotten a lot better, and it's pretty nice these days, if I say so myself. And I think it's a really good example of public interest technology as I think recently more popular term. I think historically we've read had words like free software and open source and so on, and I think they all highlight specific things. And I think in recent years I've quite liked the shift to public interest technology because it's not just focused on sort of the freedoms that you get as a user or these individual things, but rather the collective benefit that you get as a society by actually these things being used sort of for things that are important to society. And so I think basically maybe touching a little bit on the keynote that you had this morning about sort of business models around free software and so on. There are some types of software that it's very hard to actually build a product or a business around because they're just they come with your computer. It's very hard to build a product around something that's just sort of the water and air that everyone else is sort of breathing or whatever. It doesn't quite work for the water, but the context within which everything else exists. And so there are things Flatpak, things like curl or whatever that just you need for your computer to work at all. And so I think this recognition is really important. And for this project, we actually looked around a little bit in terms of who is using GNOME and then who pays for it. And so on the using side, it's some of the obvious things. We found this case study from the city of Barcelona. We found this case study from the VFX industry. They all use GNOME because they use, for example, Ubuntu or RHEL, stuff like that. Tails, for example, also uses GNOME, so a lot of journalists, activists use it that way. And then obviously it's free software, you can't control who uses it. The French police also uses it, which not so cool, but not much you can do about it. But so it's used very widely, right? But then on the other hand, there's sort of who pays for the development. And there are various companies that have sort of consulting or other business around it or around some of the technologies. But they generally focus on specific areas that matter to their customers, and that only goes so far. And so for other stuff, usually it's people sort of getting grants or just organizing themselves in some way to make things happen. But that also only goes so far in the current environment because there's not that many grants. It's actually not so easy to always get them. There's a lot of infrastructure stuff for CI and so on, and that is often sponsored. But really, a lot of the gaps are being filled by volunteers. And since GNOME consists of these hundreds of little modules, a lot of them sort of look like this, right? The classic XKCD where you have all of this important technology used by whatever the government and all these companies, but it depends on this one guy maintaining this component for a very long time, in their free time. And I think sort of an important idea here with sort of this concept of public interest technology is that we're used to sort of the public all coming together and funding infrastructure, whatever, the water, electricity, roads, stuff like that. But somehow for digital stuff, we just sort of expect it to work automatically, and we don't actually have to do any public funding there. And that's a bit weird, isn't it? And so I think like some people have realized this and have started organizing around it, specifically on like security as like sort of an important thing, because like stuff does get hacked all the time, and it's often because it's like sort of unmaintained or like components that don't get enough maintenance. And so the Sovereign Tech Fund is such an initiative that is new and very cool. It's by the German Ministry for Climate Action and Economy. And the whole point is like to focus on maintenance of like free software that is used a lot in the wild. And sort of, thinking about it as infrastructure. And as part of this, from the GNOME side, we've had this project for the past year, basically since October of last year, with an overall budget of 1 million, which like for public sort of whatever procurement is like a very small amount of money. For us, it's a pretty big amount of money. It was basically organized by 2 community members, Sonny, Piers, and myself. And like sort of our idea was we look at like really critical underfunded areas, for example, like around security, and we make sure that those things are improved like in a sustainable way. We had a bunch of areas of focus, but it's mostly like the kinds of things you would expect, like accessibility, security, QA, all of these like fundamental things that make everything else sort of work. Just to look at the overall project, so we had 28 contractors. We tried to like get people from the community who were already working on components to like get basically more time to do maintenance and so on. And then like we also had 2 consultancy partnerships because in some cases like we sort of needed to have like certain people to do this because there's not so many people who are experts at certain things. And so we partnered with Igalia and CodeThink, who are also companies that support GNOME already anyway, to like basically work on certain specific things around accessibility for Igalia and around GNOME OS and like QA stuff for CodeThink. Because there was basically no other way to get these things done, but they were really important to us. And I think it's really cool that this was possible under STF, because this kind of thing is not possible under every type of grant. Looking a little bit at the budget, so that whole thing is like basically 1 million. All these numbers are very approximate, but just like sort of to give you an idea. We had basically like 60K going to the GNOME Foundation as a fiscal sponsor, or like host. Around 60K going to project management, so that's like Sonny and I sort of like doing coordination, like meetings and so on. And then like about 300K like going to the consultancies, and the rest like the other like individual contractors. A little bit about the current status. So like we're almost at the end of this process now. Most things roughly went the way we planned, and where they didn't, like sort of SDF was really flexible about like changing the plans a little bit, because for example like with systemd in some cases they wanted us to do things a little bit differently than we thought initially, and then like sort of we found a way to make it work. And so I think we're quite happy with that. And currently, that's basically like running out a little bit towards the end of the year. And then we're currently in the process of putting together an application for the next round for 2025. Since we only have a very small amount of time left, I have a very small selection of the literally hundreds of really important things that were fixed as part of this. Like I cannot overstate how many things were fixed thanks to this investment by the SDF. So let's start with accessibility. I think everyone knows the Linux accessibility stack has been severely under-maintained for a very long time, and we were really happy that we could actually get some of the maintainers of these important components like time to maintain things, make them better. So as part of this, like Joni, the Orca maintainer, like did a lot of really good work to improve our screen reader. Orca is our screen reader. There were a lot of improvements for accessibility on Wayland, including this new Newton architecture, which is currently in prototype stage, but might become the new like accessibility architecture for desktop Linux on Wayland. And then a lot of stuff around WebKit GTK, our web rendering engine. On the security side, there are a bunch of like things around the keyring were rewritten in Rust. So both like the keyring and the keyring front end have new Rust implementations, which I hear is good for security. There was a lot of work to integrate systemd homed, so we can actually like encrypt the disk when you only suspend the computer versus like shutting it down, and that's really exciting. There was work on automated CVE tracking, specifically around like GNOME OS and that whole stack. And then STF has a bug bounty program, and as part of that, we also like have a bug bounty program now. On the hardware support front, there was a lot of stuff around sort of like GNOME Shell Mother, specifically support for smaller displays, so like for example smaller laptops, but also a bunch of things that really like for a long time were like almost done, but really needed that final push. For example, like variable refresh rate, a bunch of stuff around fractional scaling, and then hardware acceleration for screencasting, so that screencasts don't make your computer lag, and then it's laggy on the screencast, which is kind of a problem. On the Flatpak portal side, we finally, after many years, have a new file chooser, which actually uses our regular file manager, Nautilus, and that just makes that whole thing way better. We have a new portal for USB devices, so that's like basically a way for sandboxed apps to get access to only to certain USB devices rather than just all of them, which means that like if you give access to one thing, you also get access to the camera or something, which is not great. And then also, a bunch of things around WebKit GTK within Flatpak, so better sandboxing for web views and the like, and also a new portal for global keyboard shortcuts. On the platform side, we have support for WebDAV now in online accounts, which allows for much more useful online account stuff across the system. Julian had a talk earlier about notifications and like sort of a whole new generation of notification APIs. Alice did some really good work on GTK, adding CSS variables. I mean, Alice and other GTK contributors worked on this a lot, and I think we're going to see really big benefits from this in the future. And also, glib being one of those like sort of really low-level things that everyone uses, like the maintainer, took a few months to just like sort of make sure the project looks better maintenance-wise. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we wanted to support. Finally, on the QA and GNOME OS front, GNOME OS, our testing operating system, was ported to systemd sysupdate, which is the new fancy systemd update stack. We have a new installer using systemd repart. We have some very cool tooling around basically testing merge requests using systemd sysext, and also the OpenQA infrastructure got a lot of improvements. I know this was very fast, but unfortunately, this is the time we have. But like a few takeaways from all of this. Basically, we got a shit ton done in like very little time with not that much money, which I think is a very nice success. And I think like there are a few things from the SDF side that like made this, I think, particularly helpful from our side. One is this focus on like maintaining software that's currently in use rather than like focusing on some new thing that maybe like whatever may be adopted or not. But like just take the thing that's already being used and make sure it's really good and well maintained. It's larger in terms of investment, and the flexible like timing sort of like just made it easier to work with for us for like many different people and like lots of different smaller projects. There's no geographic limitations to like sort of the contractors, because that's always tricky. Like if the maintainer lives in another country, it doesn't help if the like whatever thing is only for people living in Germany. And then yeah, it allowed us to do the subcontracting with Igalia and CodeThink, which was very helpful for a few things. And so yeah, in general, I think I would just like to underline it's an incredibly effective use of public funds. Like I don't think in terms of like whatever budget or time or whatever, you could have done this really any other way. And I would heartily sort of recommend doing this more in other areas. Because like if Germany can do this, why couldn't someone else? Why couldn't, I don't know, like Italy or Bolzano or someone else do similar initiatives? I think with relatively little money that is actually sort of within the whatever purview of various local administrators, you could do similar programs and have a lot of like benefit for very little investment. And with that, since we only have another minute or so, a few thanks. I'd like to obviously thank the Sovereign Tech Fund, Igalia and CodeThink for partnering with us. I think reviews are really important for this kind of thing, so I don't want to like leave that unmentioned. We had Red Hat really graciously helping us with reviews on the various like components where we needed Red Hat maintainers to review stuff. And same thing for the systemd project. They've all been incredibly helpful upstream. I'd like to thank various community members who helped like both put the proposals together and then like sort of work through them, like plan things, get things merged. The team who actually did all of the work, including Julian, who's here. And then I think most importantly, Sonny Piers, who along with me planned this, but really like most of the organizational genius behind all of this was him. And none of this would have been possible, especially not at this, I think, pretty incredible scale, without his talents and motivation. So yeah, thanks to all of them, and also thanks to you for listening. And if there's any questions, we have 38 seconds. Thank you.
Now we have 30 seconds. So if you have any question, please feel free to ask. Yeah.
20 seconds.
Microphone. Okay.
With the current changes that are occurring to the German government, are you that optimistic for your near future, for the close future, with the backing of the SDF fund, if it is that much closely connected to the Federal Ministry of Economy, with the current change of the German federal government? Are you optimistic?
Quick response.
I would say somewhat optimistic, yeah. Like, I think this stuff is slightly more long-term. But then again, you never know, right? That generally with public funding, it does somewhat depend on the right people being in the room when the budget is planned. So, but we don't know at this point.